Okay. Page 6. I wish I was 18 again. They have some preparation at the top. Now they're introducing you to some other chords. See, country music uses a lot of primary chords, but it uses other chords too. And you'll see in here where I like to use the music. Let's use some music. The first line here on this in the left hand, you see it's a C chord in the first full measure. And then the next one is an A minor 7 chord here. The C's missing. The full chord is here. What it is an A minor chord with the 7th added. Then they lift out the C. You don't have to use all the notes. The next measure is a D minor chord. It's like a D chord except it's a minor chord. So they're using different chords throughout. You have the G7 chord, it's whatever. It's kind of interesting, just as long as you're aware, because you know a guitar player now will have something a little more interesting to play rather than just the primary chords. We'll talk about this a little bit, starting with the right hand. This musical motif, I'll call it, a musical motif is just a short musical idea. Just a few notes, that's okay, and this is it. Now, watch their fingering, because I tend to do a 4-5 on those top notes, but in the last measure, you need the 3-5. So you could do 3-5 on all of them if you wanted. The melody's the top note here. Connect it with the fingers. That's why we're fingering it this way. The thumb doesn't, you don't need to connect the bottom note so much because it's the top note we want to hear. You're putting more weight on the top note to bring it out. Well, and then the actual piece starts, because that's introduction. There in the second line. Melody's the top note. Got dotted rhythms. I hope you understand them by now. Bring out the top note. Watch the fingering. Etc. That's pretty much it going throughout here. I don't really see anything tricky if you just follow their fingering. Your hands moving around a little bit, it's fine. Eventually you want to get to where you can feel your way around. You're not moving very far. Over on page 8, take a look at the third line down. In the first measure, you're here. And then the second measure, there's a pickup note going into the third measure. You see that? That is a G. If you didn't know, you should know that it's a G. There is a tricky part in the last measure of this, but I'll talk about it when I talk about the left hand, because the hands are in each other's way here. Okay, that happens sometimes in piano music. And that's really about all I had to say for the right hand. Now, the left hand, well, we have these chords. Watch the fingering here at the beginning. On page 6, there's 3-1, and then the next measure is 2-1. Next measure is 4-2-1. So it's just not a simple 5-3-1 fingering all the time. You're using different fingers. I like that. It's good. We need to do more of that. But the tricky part, the part I want to adjust slightly, is the first measure of the second line on page 6, and any other measure like it. You have this going into the next measure. Those 4 notes together kind of go together. The first 3 lead in to the other one. It's go on to here, go up to here. You want to feel like that's a phrase or a line. You don't want to break it. And the way they're fingering it, you're going to break it. So I'm recommending on here, and the pedal will help out a little bit. It doesn't matter. Even if there were no pedal, I'd still recommend it. Is you simply finger the first note and second measure of the second line with second finger. So we don't break the phrase. That to me is more important than having your hand in position for the chord. Because after you do this, then you can come up. Etc. So I recommend that. You get it again at the top of page 7 in the last measure, going into the next line. It's here. Second finger on the first note of the second measure, second line, first measure. Too many numbers. I'm getting confused. Stop confusing me here. Also, and the first ending at the bottom, you're here. You're going to repeat back over to the page 6 on the reverse repeat sign. The second finger again. Also, in the second and third ending, you see the last measure on page 7, the ending has a 2, 3. That means second and third ending. So the first ending is the first one, and that's where you repeat back. And then you play it through a second time, and that's the second ending. And then whenever you get over to the other pages, they're going to send you back to that sign on page 6. You see the squiggly thingamajigger? And that's the third one, so the third ending there is also the last measure on page 7. You've got verses on this. Look at the bottom of page 7. You see a 2 and a bunch of 3. Those are verses. So when you repeat it on the first ending, you're going to sing the words in the second verse. And then after you played the rest of the stuff on the other pages and you come back to the sign, you're going to do the third verse and sing that, if you sing it. I ain't singing it, but yeah, you get the idea. Because if you look at page 9, second line at the end, there's a DS sign al coda, then, or DS, they give you too much information, is what it is. The DS means go back to the sign. That's back on page 6. Al coda sign, that circle with the crosshairs, that tells you you go to that sign. You don't need the rest of that. You don't need the then coda. Because that circle with the crosshairs, that's what it means. So go to the circle with the crosshairs. Now that's at the top of page 9, between the last 2 measures, right there. So you play the first 2 measures in that first line on page 9, and then jump down to the coda, which is the third line. You see it's got the same circle with the crosshairs. You match up the signs, is what I'm saying. You don't need the words, is what I'm saying. And then if you didn't know, the coda is like just an extra tag on the end. It's just an extra ending. And that's the way that works. Now when we do the play with me, I'm not going to be going back and forth. I'm going to do pages 6 and 7. I'm going to repeat. I'm going to take the first ending and repeat it. But then when I do the second ending, I'm going to stop. So we're going to turn the page. I'm going to count us in again. I'll give us three counts. Yeah, 3 or 4 times. And then we'll play pages 8 and 9. Now when you finish the second line on page 9, this one, just go under the coda. It'll sound a little weird, but just go on. So it'll be this. At the bottom of page 8, look at the last measure. There's a tricky spot in here, because on the last beat, the left hand is playing an F and an A. Then the right hand wants that same A. They're in each other's way. Just as long as you're aware of it. Get off of the A, get off of the left hand. Just you have to cut a little bit short because the right hand needs it. So the last measure is here. At the end, on page 9 at the bottom, the last 2 measures in the left hand, that's a chord. Those notes taken together. And the fingering for the chord is to put the 4th finger on the E. So I'm recommending you do that. Finger it that way, not with 3. Right, so pedal-wise, this is a kind of a waltz. It's 3 or 4 times. A lot of times in waltzes, they'll only like pedal the first beat. It reinforces the natural accents. This is pedaling a little more than that, but I would still recommend lifting the pedal on beat 3. Just, you don't need it for effect. So at the beginning of this, it's here. I keep the left hand down, that's legato, but I'm going to lift the right hand with the phrasing. I'm not pedaling the 3rd beat. Etc. And I recommend using that pedaling throughout on the measures that you're pedaling. You don't pedal every measure, it would be too mushy, too blurry. Ugh. But now when you get over to page 7 on the 3rd line down, look at that. You're doing here, and I still pedal just the first 2 beats in the first measure. Now now, when you go on those last two measures, you're just pedaling the first beat. All you're doing is reinforcing the accent, the natural accent, which is the first beat of the measure. Now you can pedal all three beats, the first measure of the last line on page 7. When nothing is happening, you can go ahead and pedal all three beats. It's like the second measure of the first line on page 7. Now on pages 8 and 9, I recommend again, pedal the first two beats on those measures and then lift up. Unless it's a measure where the right hand has like a dotted half note. Take a look on page 8, first line, last measure. You pedal the whole measure there. But on the first measure of the second line, just the first two beats, because we want a break in the sound in the right hand before we go on. Watch the pedaling and then play with me, and hopefully that'll help you out a little bit. The coda, when you get over there on page 9, they have a break in the pedal. This is unusual. Usually you just see a legato pedal there. They want a break in the sound in the left hand between the measures. So it's here. And then lift the pedal with the hands on the second measure before you play the 8th note. So there's a break in the sound there. So to do the first line of the coda, it's this. Etc. Then at the end, the last measure, the pedal and the hands come up at the same time. I'm going to hold that fermata one extra count. So it would be a 1, 2, 3, hold off, like so. That's not technically accurate, but with a fermata, you can hold it however long you think you should hold it. So we don't have to be technically accurate. I haven't talked about dynamics. Once you learn it, then kind of feel the dynamics. You can get a little louder and softer, follow the words. When do you feel like it should get a little louder and softer? If they don't give you specific instructions, and a lot of country music doesn't, it's up to you. 3/4 time with a 8th note pickup, so I'm going to give us like 2.5 counts. So it'll be 1, ready, go. Like so. So be ready. Right hand's here. Left hand's here. Foot's on the pedal. 1 and ready and go. Stop, turn the page, put your hands where they go, foot's on the pedal. I'll give us 3 counts. Now technically the first beat in the left hand should be played with the second finger because you're coming off of that run. So I'm going to start with second finger in the left hand. 1, ready, go. that